Richard, just considering the article you wrote recently about what's going on in the United States, considering what's happening in Israel, between Israel and Palestine, I think it's so important right now because we've learned that Netanyahu is attacking Biden not to help them, not to provide them with weapons. And after all the things that Biden and his administration did for them. And how do you see the situation, considering your article? Could you provide some information about your take on this conflict in Gaza and the repercussions in the United States?
Yeah, well, the way I would get at this, and the article you're referring to, the most important point about that article was my reaction to the behavior of many universities. Importantly, not all, not at all. Many universities did not do what I'm about to decide, but the ones who did were the ones that the media focused attention on. So the image at home and abroad is of many universities calling in the police, the leaders of the university, calling in the police to repress students who were demonstrating against the United States foreign policy. And I want to come back to that because that's the thing that motivated me. And I should make clear, I'm a professor. I have worked for half a dozen universities here in the United States. It's been my work my whole life. So one thing I know really well, personally, firsthand, is how universities work. I've had to deal with presidents of universities, and administrators, as well as faculty and students. So it's been my life, and I'm doing it now. I teach in an American university where the students demonstrated and where the university called the police. So I'm directly involved in that too. Okay. First, about the Arab-Israeli or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It has been going on for many decades. Across those decades, there have been a variety of campaigns, acts by individuals, acts by groups, acts by the whole community of Israelis hostile to Palestinians and of Palestinians hostile to Israelis. One of the things that has been constant has been the periodic explosion of violent acts of these communities against each other. One of the most remarkable things about that has been the fact that from the very beginning, partly because the arriving Jewish immigrants came mostly from Europe and came with the connection to Europe as the colonial power in the Middle East, this was a fight between European, white, Judeo-Christian on the one hand, and the local indigenous, Arabic, Islamic people on the other. And in those battles, the Israelis were proud that they always killed many more Palestinians than whatever the Palestinians had been able to do to the Israelis, because the Israelis were better funded, were more developed economically, were more militarily advanced, and had alliances with Europe, the United States, and all of that. And the Palestinians didn't. Okay. Each time the violence exploded, it was overwhelmingly Israelis who came away with minimum suffering and Palestinians with maximum. When this was pointed out, as people did, the Israeli answer was, we will never be here in Israel safe and secure if we don't make it clear to these Palestinians that if they interfere with us, they will suffer more than we do. Okay. You can say that once. You can maybe even say it twice. But the Israelis have said it 50 times. And all I know is today, the level of violence, which we were supposed to never see because the earlier violence was supposed to solve the problem, has failed to do so, because the violence now is worse than all of the other ones. So when now they say, as they do, because the Israelis are saying the same thing, we must get rid of Hamas, whatever you say. Here again, we hear, we must do this awful destruction of Gaza in order for Israelis to be safe and secure. This has never worked in the past, and there is zero reason to believe it will affect. If you can imagine with me how upset the Israeli society has been by the killing of 1,200, more or less, Israelis on the 7th of October. And now you have to add to the disruption and anger and bitterness that has caused. You now must imagine, if my numbers are correct, 35,000 Gazans. In other words, 35 times. And I'm not even counting the injured and destroyed housing and destroyed hospitals and universities and all the rest. You've created, if you have half a brain, you've created more recruits to Hamas than you have killed. You have made your problem worse, just like you did. Oh, you have to come up with, this is not a solution. It never was a solution. Now you can continue to do this, but the world has changed. And what the Israelis cannot face, or at least there's no sign of it, is they are allied with what is becoming weaker. And their enemy is allied with what is becoming stronger. India, China, they're not on the Israeli side. They may have good relations with the Israeli government. That's a different matter. But when they have to choose which side are you on, they're not on Israel's side. And you're also seeing around the Western world more and more people in Europe, in the United States, in Japan, who are beginning to realize they too may be on the wrong side with Israel, especially when you have leaderships as far to the right as Mr. Netanyahu has gathered around himself. I mean, he's making it much harder for there to be sympathy, given what his fellow ministers say publicly and what gets sent around the world, as well as what they're doing. Okay, but that's my sense of course, my sympathy, stop. This is counterproductive. You're creating a level of hatred between Gazans or Palestinians and Israelis that is terrifying in terms of where it's going to go and how it's going to be expressed. And only very ignorant people imagine anything else as an outcome here. What are you doing? What are you doing? It is, anyway. So, large numbers of Americans, to their credit, young people, look at this. Whether they know the history or not, I don't know. Probably most of them don't. And they don't want the killing. They listen to the arguments, because a young person who gets a sign and goes out and marches with a sign is a person who's motivated. I've been a teacher all my life. I know which of my students are going to be out there and which of them are not. The majority are not. It's a minority that do anything active on a campus. That's always been true, whether it's on the right wing or the left wing or in the middle. But they usually know something has worked out, so they have a thought in their mind about what they are doing. So, in the half dozen universities where I am connected to either the students or the faculty or something, or I've been there or I'm there now, here's what I know. The students were mostly sympathetic to the Palestinians, but only on the grounds that they're being slaughtered, that this is, they have no effective defense, they're being bombed, they have no airplane, they have no air force, they're being, it's a big, powerful country, killing mostly women and children, destroying apartment houses, etc. And they don't like to see that. That's awful. Then they see that they learn a little bit. Israel is basically rich and powerful, and the Palestinians are neither, and et cetera, et cetera. Hamas has no tanks. Israel has lots of tanks, and you can see them on television. You can see they shoot the tanks and destroy the buildings, and Hamas has teenagers running around with little machine things on their shoulders. What is this? Is crazy. And it's not about Israel and Palestine for most of my students. They're the same kind of students who went out and demonstrated against the war in Vietnam, when it was the powerful Americans and the very poor Vietnamese, right? The wars that the United States has fought, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, you know what these are? Countries, wars between a rich, powerful, globally dominant military and some of the poorest countries on this planet. They've been studies in an unequal fight. And Americans who go out and demonstrated are more about that than they are about the specifics of each one. Those people didn't know anything about Vietnamese history or North, South at all, but they could see that this was a slaughter of poor people by rich people, of weak people by strong people. And it's ugly. It's an aesthetic horror. And the students are out there demanding a ceasefire. And stop this. Anything is better than this. Okay. And I also know from the years and years, I was involved in the anti-Vietnam. So, I really have personal history in all of this. The students are always peaceful. They don't want, first of all, they are frightened of violence. That's part of why they're out there. It's terrifying to them. So they're not looking for, and they are not interested in violence when they go out and demonstrate. Number one. Number two, those of them that are the organizers understand that if there were to be violence, it would be worse for them. The police would hurt them, but more important, the average student to whom they are appealing won't come to the demonstration if they're afraid, some policeman going to hit them over the head, or that there'll be violence. They don't want that. So you have peaceful protest by students demanding peace. That's what this was about. Now, it surprised everybody because the government wanted to put out the picture of the United States as the loyal ally of Israel coming to Israel's defense. Mr. Biden, literally wasted, it was hours after the October 7th events, Mr. Biden was out there talking about how we will help Israel. Okay. Mr. Biden didn't do his homework, and his advisors didn't either. They had no idea how large the sympathy for Palestine was and is in the United States. And by the way, it is now stronger than it was before. If you measure the effects of this war, then you can understand what may have been, I don't know, may have been in the minds of the leaders of Hamas, because they have put their demands and their concerns and their views onto the consciousness of the people of the world, including Americans, way more successfully than they have been able to do it in the previous half century. So, wow, you better respect that, because if you don't ask why is that, you're going to be missing what you clearly didn't understand before. And that's very dangerous. And yet here in the United States, that's what we do. There's another sign of a declining empire. It cannot analyze. If you lose, it's even more important to ask what happened than when you win. But we do the opposite. When there's a win, we're celebrating. When there's a loss, we say, what loss? We imaginary make it disappear. So what these students did is they went out and they said, hey, there ought to be a ceasefire. Okay. At that point, a remarkable thing happened. Wealthy Americans, mostly Jewish, but not only Jewish, felt frightened, which I understand. They were frightened by the level of violence. Look what Hamas did on the 7th. That is a pretty, wow, you must feel very strongly, and that's very frightening. Nobody wants to be hated. Nobody. And when you see a big expression of hate coming towards you, it's frightening. For Jews with their history of anti-Semitism, it's easy even for them to see, oh my God, that problem, which has existed for centuries, is now, they're ready to see it, and they see it often when they should, and they often see it when it isn't there. But, one understands a little bit how they could feel frightened. And then they did something typically American, not particularly Jewish, but American. If you have money and something frightens you, you spend money to make it go away. The mentality of the rich. You see that in other countries too. And so the rich here that were frightened, as I say, mostly Jewish, but plenty of non-Jews who also feel that way, began to put pressure on the universities or on the local police departments to stop this. These are people who have not much of a commitment to civil liberties. They rarely do, except, on holidays, they'll give a speech about America is a great country because we're civil liberty, but they don't. When something frightens them, out the window goes the commitment to civil liberty. So they call the police department, or they call the university, or sometimes they call both of them, and they want this to stop. They want they don't want to turn on the radio or the television or the internet and see pictures of students showing sympathy for Gaza, for the Palestinians. They're not interested in the detail, a ceasefire, which of course will save Israeli lives and all that too. No. They want everybody to be 100% behind Mr. Biden. And the students are saying, we have the right as citizens to say we disagree with we don't want the United States to provide the money and the weapons to do this. Stop doing that. In that way, we can, force the ceasefire, because the Gazans don't have much in the way of weapons, and the Israelis fight with our weapons and our money. It makes a certain sense. Students in this country have done this kind of thing many times. So they go out and they do what they have every right to do and what they have a long history of doing. and what most of the time they have done in a perfectly peaceful way. That's the history. And everybody who pays any attention knows this. I know it because I've been in those demonstrations. I understand. I've organized them. I've been in them. So everybody who has knows this. And then comes the tragedy, which is the tragedy of the United States as it goes down. A significant number of university presidents and a significant number of local police authorities responded to the pressure from rich donors. And remember, the rich donors are clever. They call the politicians to whom they have given money, who owe them. We want you now, please. So the politician calls the police chief. Now the police guy knows he's got the support of the politicians. So now he can send in his men to hit the students over the head, which they did. That transformed the discussion from what it began as ceasefire, no ceasefire. That was the issue. Now it became two issues. Do we have the right to demonstrate here without interference, either from the university or from the police, or do we not? And that issue is more interesting to most students than something going on thousands of miles away. So now many more students are involved because they are concerned about the abusive treatment of students and the curtailment of civil liberties in the United States. Many more students than were interested in or involved on the issue of Israel-Palestine. That was a mistake. When Netanyahu and the others tell Americans they should stop this, whoa, now we get even worse. Now we get a foreign political power directing American police power against American students, and the Americans are going, what the hell is this? What is this? First of all, he should not, it's none of his business. And he should be told by our leaders, butt out, whoa, you have, can you imagine Mr. Biden directing the police in Paris to beat up on students? And not just doing it, but doing it publicly so that everybody knows that it's going on. No, you can't. And I'm talking now about, this happened in New York City, where I live. It happened at all 6 campuses of the University of California. That's the largest public university system in the United States. California's the biggest state. They have the biggest public university. All 6 campuses had this kind of confrontation. You have reignited, here's the stupidity of the people who run this country now. You have reignited a student movement. There wasn't one before October. There was no student movement dominating the life of our colleges and universities. Now there is, and you will see when the summer recess, which we are now in when that's over, when people go back to school at the end of August into September, you will see that it's very alive and very much going on. And it may cost Mr. Biden the presidency, because young people now have a powerful reason not to like him, not to want him, not to agree. This is not about preferring Trump. They don't. But it is a reason to say, I cannot vote for the man who is funding and militarily equipping whatever you think it is that's going on in Gaza. Whether you believe it's a genocide, whether you believe it's a war, however you construct that, you are losing voters, you're losing students, you're losing an entire generation. And remember, young people who go through this experience, especially if they are either assaulted by the police or they witness their boyfriend or their girlfriend hurt by the police who are, because this society is falling apart, our police now are very tough, very angry, very frightened, and they're violent and they do terrible things all over the place. And not just to black people, although worse to the blacks than they do to the whites. That's the truth. And anybody who tells you otherwise is really someone you go find somebody else to talk to. So these are ugly experiences and they leave deep scars. And that is happening to a whole generation of young people. And it is associated with this Palestinian-Israeli issue. And if I were an Israeli, I would be worried sick about that. You have created a sympathy and a constituency interested in and supportive of Palestine as the victim. If you're an Israeli, you ought to understand that that notion that you have been victimized, that has been used by the Israelis for half a century. The Holocaust, everything that happened in Germany, blah, blah, blah. That has been something that has brought sympathy to Israel. They've lost it. They are now not the victim. They're the perpetrator. Their worst enemy, the Palestinians, have now grabbed the status of victim. This is very, very dangerous. In every Arab country, and more broadly in every Islamic country, this is a hideous victimization. It is for them another example of European colonialism in which the Judeo-Christian capitalist world is abusing this. You should want, if you have half a brain, you should want to avoid this. You should have been smart enough to understand what Hamas did was a sign of their desperation on the 7th. They were desperate. They had been fighting for 50 years and they didn't have a whole hell of a lot to show for it. Slowly but steadily, the Israelis were settling more in the north than in Gaza, but in Gaza too. They had dispersed the opposition. They were able to control the. So you took a desperate gamble. You took a desperate step. But if you stop your reasoning there, you're childish. Israel's response is also a desperate effort, but it makes less sense. What the Hamas did, at least they understood. It'll put you on the headlines for at least a few days. What the Israelis don't seem to understand is they are losing their status as a global victim, and they are becoming the worst possible example of the West's savagery, if I could use it. And this is going to cost them, There have been a few people around the world who've said to the Israelis, you are making a mistake above all for yourself. You are self-destructing. You think you are delivering a blow to your enemy. And of course, in some ways you are. But you are also damaging yourself in a way that is fundamentally irrational. Your rage and your anger are leading you to make the mistakes that rage and anger often lead people to make. And you're going to be one of the great examples in modern life of that mistake. And you should see it and you should stop it. And if you don't, the prognosis is very, very bad. But remember, I want to be honest with you. I am thrilled that students are once again making themselves known in our society. Students in many parts of the world have been the leaders in calling out injustice, in calling out changes that need to be made in society. And we were wondering here in the United States what had happened to our students who were quiet for quite a few years, and they are not quiet anymore. And they are mobilizing and organizing within colleges and universities, across them into student association. This is for us in the United States, that together with the rising militancy of the American labor movement, these are enormously important, new, powerful shoots in a progressive direction. The mass mobilization of students in this country is not for anything on the political right. It's all about the political left. And nobody should make that mistake. And that's exactly the same as you see in the labor movement. So I don't want to leave people with a sense of doom and gloom. It is awful what university administrators have done. Let me conclude by giving you one bizarre example. And it's in that article too. So desperate were the police and the universities in trying to justify that they were physically abusing students, preventing them from walking down the campus in front of the library or a dormitory, carrying signs for peace, that they had to come up with the behavior of desperate people. So here was one of the most popular arguments. The university grounds, the grass, the sidewalks, the benches, these are, get ready, private property. And so we, the university, we are the owners of this private property, and therefore we have the right to say to the student, get off my private property. And the police came in and they used the law. We are the police. And if you own private property and somebody's there you don't want, you have the right to call the police to remove them from the private property. Yeah. Okay. So we had to, I had to do this several times. I had to explain either to the journalist or to the students or to the university that you are not the owner of private property. Here in the United States, first of all public universities are owned by the people. So it's not private, it's public property, and you are not in charge with me listening. I can throw you off with as much justification as you can throw, so stop. But in private universities, and I am currently working in a private university, although I have worked in both public and private. Private universities are tax exempt in the United States. If you're a private university and you make money, you do not have to pay tax. A business doing the same thing you're doing has to pay tax on its profits. You can earn a profit, you don't pay any tax, right? Number one. Number two, if you're a professor and you ask for a grant to do research, and suppose you get it from the Defense Department or you get a grant from the Agriculture Department, it doesn't matter. The way grants work, and I've done this, you get a certain amount of money, say $200,000, to do a research project. But the way it works is the government gives the $200,000 to your university to cover your research project, but they give them an additional between 50 and 80% for the general expenses of the university on top of it. So they would get, say, $375,000, the university, give me $200,000 for my research, and keep the remainder for the general fund uses of the university. That's common. And for major universities like Harvard and Yale, where all these student activities took place, and many of them, it means that the government is a major funder of the universities. By the way, 3/4 of our college students go to public universities, so they're completely owned by the government. And the other quarter go to private universities whose major source of income is the government. So this is public property. You are not in the position of a private. Stop it. Besides the absurdity of ejecting from the university the students registered and paying to go to the university. They have every right to be in the grass or on the lawn or sitting on the bench. You know, it is, but the absurdity of it is a sign. How, I mean, it makes it work. What you are doing is repression. That's bad enough. You're so desperate. You know that there's no justification. So you have to invent nonsense and use it. It shows about you. It doesn't show about anything else. And the students know it. And the faculty are figuring it out. And there's now more and more faculty joining the students. And you have to remember this summer, when 10 million students go home, they're going to be talking to their mother and their father and their grandmother and their cousin, and they're going to be talking about this. And you're going to have an army of students who are giving everybody a different picture. If the Israelis were not in a level of rage, of out of control, right-wing craziness, they would understand you don't want this. This is, when your child tells you about it, it has much more impact than anything Israel or AIPAC or any of their other arms can achieve. And this, it's, as I say, all of this, like the comments of the Polish leadership that they want to divide Russia into 200 ethnicities. I mean, when people talk like that, it's all about them. It's no longer about the issue. And what those people are dealing with is their decline in the world. And that's a sad, pathetic process to watch. And I think we have to understand that's what we're facing. And my hope is that the leaders of the world begin finally to face up to it. The Americans will be the last. And that's understandable. Who wants to watch your own situation decline and deteriorate? Nobody wants to see it. So we are still living mostly as a nation in denial. But with each failure, which Ukraine and Gaza already are, this is breaking down. And the attack on the students is just another way that this lesson is being learned. Biggest question the students asked me, why is this happening? And when I told them what I've tried to summarize with you here, I get the nods that people see. They see now why the university they like, the education they have worked hard to pay for, could allow this to happen.